She laughed and said, 25 or 30 clients. Who cares? Like she was talking about paper clips. Not people, not contracts, just numbers. I didn't laugh with her. I didn't argue either. I stood up, unclipped my badge, placed it on the conference table, and walked out. That wasn't dramatic. That was me realizing I couldn't fix what she was about to break. I'd been with the company for a little over 4 years. Mid-size B2B. Boring product. Stable clients. I was a customer success manager, the kind of role no one notices unless something goes wrong. I handled onboarding, renewals, escalations. I knew which clients needed handholding and which just wanted to be left alone. I knew whose contracts were fragile and whose were rock solid. I'd saved deals quietly, fixed mistakes that weren't mine, and never once missed a renewal target. My badge mattered to me. It wasn't status. It was access. Trust. Proof I belonged there. Then she arrived, new director of client growth. That was her title. She came from a high-velocity environment, which was corporate code for chaos wrapped in confidence. First week, she didn't ask how things worked. She told us how they were going to work now. Slides, buzzwords, aggressive timelines. Everything was about scale, volume, speed. Retention is great, she said during her first team meeting, smiling like she'd solved something. But growth is what gets attention. At first, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. New leaders talk big. It's part of the job. But the tone shifted fast. Client calls were cut short. Onboarding timelines were compressed past what was realistic. When someone raised a concern, she reframed it as negativity. "You're thinking too small," she told me once, after I flagged that pushing 3 enterprise clients live in the same week would overload support. "They'll adapt." They didn't. Tickets spiked. Response times slipped. Clients got frustrated. I did damage control the way I always had. Late calls, careful emails, smoothing things over. I assumed she'd notice the strain and adjust. Instead, she doubled down. Dashboards started changing. Metrics were redefined. Churn was reclassified. A canceled contract became a delayed expansion. A client threatening to leave was labeled at risk but retained. One afternoon, she leaned over my desk and said casually, "If a client is noisy but still paying, they count. Don't overthink it." I started documenting things, not to build a case, just to keep myself sane. Dates, decisions, follow-ups. I sent recap emails after meetings, the polite kind that say, just to confirm what we discussed. I saved versions of reports before and after they were adjusted. Still, I stayed. I told myself leadership above her would notice. That results would catch up to reality. That professionalism would win. The moment that cracked it for me came in a quarterly planning meeting. Senior managers, directors, the usual polished crowd. She was presenting growth projections, numbers that looked incredible, too incredible. A VP asked how we were supporting the increased load. She smiled and said, "Our CSMs are aligned. They're managing larger portfolios efficiently." Then she looked directly at me and added, "Right?" That was when she laughed. Not cruelly, casually, like the answer didn't matter. 25 or 30 clients, who cares?" she said. "They're adults. They'll figure it out." I felt something shift, not anger, clarity. Those weren't just accounts. They were contracts with obligations, SLAs, compliance requirements, promises made in writing, and she was treating them like interchangeable parts. In that moment, I saw the path clearly. If this failed, it wouldn't be leadership strategy. It would be execution issues. It would be my name attached to churn, complaints, and breaches I'd warned about. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't call her out. I simply stood, removed my badge, set it on the table, and said, "I can't be responsible for this." No one stopped me. I walked out of the room, past my desk, past people pretending not to look. In the elevator, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the certainty that staying would cost me more than leaving. At the time, I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. I thought quitting would be clean. A line drawn, a door closed, a hard but honest choice. Instead, it followed me home. That night my phone buzzed with a Slack notification from a coworker I trusted. Just one line. "She's saying you bailed before QBR prep." I stared at it longer than I should have. Not angry yet, just tired. I typed back, asked what else she was saying. The reply came a minute later, that you couldn't handle the load, that you panicked. That was when I understood what I'd actually walked away from. The next morning, I got an email from HR, neutral tone, calendar link. Exit process. Nothing unusual except it referenced performance concerns. Concerns that had never existed until I stood up. I showed up anyway, calm, polite. I answered questions factually. I didn't accuse. I didn't editorialize. When they asked why I left, I said exactly what I'd said in the meeting. I couldn't be responsible for decisions I didn't control. I mentioned capacity, risk, documentation. I watched their faces carefully. They nodded, typed notes, thanked me. Then came the part that stung. 2 days later, a former client emailed me directly. Not angry, confused. They'd been told I was transitioning off accounts due to bandwidth issues, and that their renewal delay was a client-side timing decision. None of that was true. I'd flagged their concerns weeks earlier. I still had the emails. That was when irritation turned into something colder. I started hearing things through the quiet channels. The DMs, the late-night texts, the off-the-record calls. She was telling leadership that I'd been overwhelmed, that I resisted change, that I'd failed to scale. It was subtle. No outright lies, just a narrative carefully shaped to make her decisions look inevitable and my exit look like weakness. I realized then how the game worked. She wasn't reckless. She was strategic. She pushed volume knowing something would break. And when it did, there would always be a name attached that wasn't hers. Mine just happened to be convenient. I went back through my records, not obsessively, methodically, meeting recaps, Slack threads, version histories on reports that had been edited after review, emails where I'd raised capacity concerns and gotten one-line replies, like, "Let's align later," that never happened. I didn't forward anything dramatic. I didn't dump files on anyone's desk. I organized them. Dates, context, nothing emotional. Just facts lined up cleanly enough that anyone reading them would reach the same conclusion on their own. That night, I made one decision. I wasn't going to argue with her story. I was going to let it run into reality. I contacted the one person I knew couldn't ignore discrepancies, someone in operations who'd worked with me before, who understood how renewals flowed into revenue recognition. I didn't accuse. I asked a simple question about how delayed expansions were being reported. I attached one example, then another. I ended the email with, "Let me know if I'm missing something." I wasn't. What I didn't know yet was how fast things would unravel. Over the next week, meetings started disappearing from calendars. Dashboards were temporarily unavailable. People stopped replying to group threads and started messaging one-on-one. A manager I barely knew asked for clarification on a client I'd handled months ago. Then finance asked about a renewal that had been counted twice. And then silence, the kind that means something's gone wrong. I kept my distance. I answered questions when asked. I sent files when requested. I didn't volunteer opinions. I didn't gloat. I let the process do what processes do when someone's been cutting corners too close to the edge. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. I was watching quietly as the story she'd told began to collide with the records she'd edited around. The call that finally broke me wasn't loud. No yelling, no threats. Just her voice, calm and precise, asking me to help close the loop. Oh, she wanted me to sign off on a revised client summary, one I hadn't written. It reframed missed milestones as client-driven delays and removed a note I'd added weeks earlier about internal capacity risks. My name was still on it. My initials were still expected at the bottom. I asked why the note was gone. She paused, just long enough to be deliberate. That language creates unnecessary exposure, she said. Legal prefers we keep things clean. I told her legal had never mentioned that to me. Another pause. I'll handle legal, she replied. I just need you to confirm the summary reflects reality. That was the moment it clicked. This wasn't about optimism or growth or even ego. This was insulation. She was building a buffer between her decisions and their consequences, and my signature was part of that wall. If clients escalated, if auditors asked questions, if revenue got questioned, the paper trail would point to me as the one who'd validated the story. I said I wouldn't sign it. Her tone changed, not angry, not panicked, flat. Then I'll note that you declined to align. I hung up and sat there, staring at my laptop, replaying every meeting where she'd brushed past concerns. Every time she'd said, "We'll clean it up later." Later had arrived, and she was already deciding who would be standing closest to the mess. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was scared, but because my brain wouldn't stop connecting dots. Every small adjustment, every time she'd pushed for speed over process, every report that had looked a little too good. By morning, the decision was made. I went through everything again, this time with intent. I didn't cherry-pick. I didn't dramatize. I built a timeline. When risks were raised, how they were responded to. What changed afterward. I saved original files with metadata intact. I pulled call notes from the CRM that showed unresolved issues being marked green. I highlighted the gaps without filling them in emotionally. I was careful. Everything I kept was mine to access. Nothing confidential left the boundaries it shouldn't. I didn't forward sensitive data to myself. I requested copies through proper channels when needed. If anyone ever questioned my methods, they'd hold up. Halfway through organizing it all, I realized something else. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done trying to protect people who didn't want protection. For years, I'd absorbed friction to keep things smooth. Clients happy, leadership calm, problems contained. I thought that was professionalism. What it really was, I finally understood, was unpaid risk management for someone else's ambition. I stopped covering. When questions came in from operations, I answered exactly what was asked. When finance requested clarification, I sent the relevant thread and nothing extra. When someone tried to pull me into a side conversation, I kept it in writing. A few days later, she emailed me directly. Short, polite. Can you clarify why your notes differ from the latest dashboard? I replied with one sentence and an attachment. The dashboard was updated after my review. See timestamp. No commentary, no accusations. After that, her email slowed, then stopped. Meetings I wasn't invited to started producing follow-up questions that circled back to me anyway. People were comparing versions without saying so. Legal asked how client risk was assessed before renewals were counted. Compliance requested context on a terminology change they hadn't approved. I didn't know it yet, but that decision, to stop smoothing edges, was costing them everything they'd built on shortcuts. One afternoon, a former teammate called me. He sounded exhausted. "They're asking everyone to re-explain the last 2 quarters," he said, individually. That was new. Leadership didn't do that unless something had already failed. He hesitated before adding, "They asked if you'd raised concerns before you left." I told him the truth. Yes, repeatedly. There was a long pause on the line. Then he exhaled. I thought so. When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not vindication. Relief. Like I'd finally put down a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. That night, I closed my laptop and didn't reopen it. For the first time since leaving, I wasn't waiting for the next message or the next twist. I'd done what I could without becoming the villain in someone else's story. Whatever happened next wouldn't be about who spoke loudest or smiled best in meetings. It would be about what was written down and who had thought far enough ahead to keep it honest. The first sign of chaos wasn't an email, it was the calendar. Standing meetings vanished without explanation. QBR prep sessions were postponed. A quarterly review that had been hyped for weeks was quietly removed, then re-added with half the attendees missing. When leadership gets confident, they invite everyone. When they get nervous, they narrow the room. People started calling instead of writing. A manager from support asked if I remembered when a certain enterprise client had gone live. I did. I told him the date and forwarded the onboarding checklist I'd completed. Timestamps, intact. 10 minutes later, finance asked the same question. Different phrasing, same answer. By the end of that week, it was obvious. They were rebuilding the last 2 quarters from scratch. She tried to get ahead of it. I found out because a former teammate sent me a screenshot before deleting it, a message in a private channel, telling managers to route all historical questions through leadership to ensure consistency. That's corporate language for stop freelancing the truth. Then she emailed me. Subject line. Quick sync. She wrote like nothing was wrong. Thanked me for my past contributions. Said there were some discrepancies and she wanted to align narratives. That phrase again. Narratives. I declined the meeting and replied in writing. I told her I was happy to answer factual questions by email. No commentary, no calls. She didn't respond. Instead, HR reached out. Different tone now, careful. They wanted clarification on my exit and on certain approvals associated with my role. I asked for the questions in writing. They complied. I answered each one cleanly. Bullet points, dates, attachments, no adjectives. A day later, legal contacted me. Not accusatory, curious. They asked how client risk was assessed before renewals were booked as revenue. I explained the process as it had existed, then noted where it had changed and when. I attached the meeting recap where I'd raised the concern and her response telling me to trust the new model. After that, everything went quiet. No Slack, no emails, nothing for 3 days. And then all at once, it collapsed. An internal audit was announced. Company-wide, framed as routine, but everyone knew it wasn't. Access logs were reviewed. CRM histories were frozen. Call recordings were pulled. Finance halted forward-looking projections. People who used to defend her stopped mentioning her name. A week into the audit, a client escalated directly to the CFO. They'd been promised support resources that never materialized, and now their renewal was being counted as a win despite an open breach. The email chain included half the executive team. Her strategy, speed, volume, optimism had depended on one thing: no one slowing down enough to compare notes. Audits do exactly that. I was asked to submit one more statement. This time, it wasn't about me. It was about whether I'd ever been instructed to alter or omit risk indicators. I answered honestly. Yes, here's when. Here's how. Here's the proof. After that, I wasn't contacted again. From the outside, it looked sudden. From the inside, I knew it wasn't. It was just delayed consequences finally catching up to accelerated decisions. The day she was placed on leave, no announcement was made. Her calendar just went empty. Her email auto-replied. Her projects were reassigned without comment. No one laughed anymore. I didn't feel victorious. I felt something closer to calm, the kind that comes when chaos runs out of places to hide. They had built momentum by ignoring gravity. Eventually, gravity noticed. The announcement came on a Tuesday, buried under 3 other calendar invites and a vague subject line about organizational updates. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. By then, the story had already reached me through quieter channels. She hadn't resigned. She hadn't been promoted sideways. She was terminated. No farewell message. No thank you note for her energy. Just an access cutoff, a locked laptop, and a request to return company property by courier. The kind of ending companies use when they want distance, not dialogue. The audit didn't just find errors. It found patterns. Client risk had been systematically downplayed. Revenue had been booked before obligations were met. Dashboards had been edited after reviews. Nothing cinematic, nothing illegal enough for headlines, just enough misconduct, stacked neatly to make leadership realize how close they'd come to a very public problem. They spent weeks undoing it. Clients were reclassified, apologies were sent, support staffing was increased belatedly. Finance reforecasted with numbers that actually made sense, even if they looked worse. Growth slowed. Trust took longer. No one ever asked me to come back. That was fine. I wouldn't have. A month later, HR closed my exit file with an amended note. Voluntary departure. Role misalignment. It wasn't an apology, but it was clean. My name wasn't attached to churn. It wasn't whispered in postmortems. It wasn't used as a cautionary tale. That mattered more than people realize. I started a new role shortly after. Smaller portfolio, clear boundaries, leadership that listened when someone said, "This is a risk," instead of asking how to hide it. The work was quieter, less impressive on paper, infinitely better in practice. One afternoon, while setting up my new laptop, I found my old badge at the bottom of a drawer. I'd kept it without thinking. Muscle memory, maybe. I held it for a moment, then dropped it into the trash. Not out of anger, out of closure. Here's the thing no one tells you about moments like that meeting. The laugh, the line about clients not mattering. The real damage isn't the insult, it's the signal. It tells you exactly how much of yourself you're expected to sacrifice to keep someone else comfortable. Walking away didn't make me brave. Documenting didn't make me clever. Staying calm didn't make me superior. It just meant I chose not to disappear quietly into someone else's version of events. I didn't get revenge. I didn't get an apology. I didn't get a speech where everyone finally understood. What I got was simpler. My name intact. My work defensible. My future not built on covering for someone else's shortcuts. And honestly, that was enough.